Hello again! I'm back and in line with something I've hinted at, starting a new style of DC related video, DC Deep Dive. This is to replace the 3 common misconceptions, as that video structure could only work for so long before it just became me whining about people's fanfictions for 5 minutes every 2 weeks. Anyway, expect less of a list and more of a miniature essay, for which you can thank my wonderful patrons, links below. Now, we've discussed Talia before, how she didn't used to be a dragon lady stereotype or an abusive parent, and also certainly didn't assault Bruce or manipulate Jason. I direct you to my misconceptions video on that topic. Here we'll be discussing aspects of what came after and the difficult position Talia finds herself in thanks to the writer's detrimental handling of her character. With that in mind, let's talk about how Damien's introduction/reintroduction was sort of a killing blow to Talia as a nuanced character. You see, before Damien was reintroduced, his canonical existence was in question, but regardless, Talia had left him with a loving foster family to protect him from the world she and Bruce lived in. Then it got retconned, so she just hid Damien from Bruce, and depending on the canon and timeline, was varying shades of abusive and forced massive ambitions onto him the way her father did her. This was in stark contrast to her previous characterization, and as a result, many Talia fans find even more recent comics' efforts to inject some nuance a little weak, because they all still rely on her having been abusive, but now redeeming herself or giving Damien up for his own good, which when you add in that she's a person of colour surrendering her child to a white dude, that has some not great implications. But that is to say that Talia's pre-Morrison assassination has not really been recovered and ultimately may never be, as her character remains subordinated to Damien. I.e., DC wants Damien to have this specific prickly, princely attitude and edgy backstory, so Talia's character gets dragged through the mud to make it happen. Who Talia was for 35 years before he even existed is irrelevant due to his chosen characterization and background. Of course, this isn't to deride Damien. I like the kid, but there is something to be said for how he too was used in a rather detrimental way. Because keep in mind, the Al Ghuls have a long comic history, and while Raz would occasionally veer into some deep shit, so to speak, he was still not portrayed as someone so arrogant and self-important that he had no sense of how to carry himself around people whose ideals and methods differentiated from him, and we already covered Talia. Now, as previously noted, Damien's a kid, so obviously he's not going to be as debonair as the adults in the room, but even outside of that, the decision to have Bruce impose emotional distance on his child and require his trust to be earned despite having always trusted Talia implicitly, well, it could have been reflective of how much of a worse and worse parent and mentor Bruce has become as the years went on, but that doesn't seem to have been the goal. None of this is helped by the surrounding arcs making the Al Ghul's eugenicists obsessed with getting Bruce or Tim's sperm, which also again has some unfortunate implications, along with just being very weirdly out of character and gross. They respected and liked Bruce, but not because of his blood. This leaves Damien feeling like he doesn't line up naturally with the 35 years of history that preceded him, and it serves to hurt his character on entry, I think, but also on a thematic level because it means he doesn't properly embody all the history that he's clearly meant to. Veering back to our title character, these factors play into why Talia fans aren't as enthused by recent turns in her character, because while it's nice to see her being tiptoed towards having nuanced character again, it shouldn't be necessary for her to redeem herself. DC's fine with washing out bad bits of other characters' backstories and even retconning whole arcs, but even ignoring the double standard, there's the fact it all centers on her role as a mother, which was one of the many issues, but also shows how she's still being defined as a tool in someone else's story over a character in her own right. For reference, Talia was not even always defined by her ties to Bruce or her dad. The 4-year-long LexCorp arc is a great example of Talia being able to carry her own stories and serving as a nuanced character therein. One who is morally grey, fought for good causes, and was still heavily defined by her restraint and her sense of love. Then she got turned into a ruthless, morally depraved, near-heartless monster, which was in service of making her a bad mother, yes, but as a consequence led to an entire character shift. This also tends to mean that Talia's redemption keeps many of these changes. She's still a wanton murderer, just one who cares about her son now. We should be wanting a return to good person Talia, not just good mum Talia. A return to a Talia who, yes, could kill people, but who was heavily defined by her internal conflict between violence and peace, which initially had her stuck between loyalty to her father and Bruce due to her love for both of them, but that also eventually led to her breaking out of that role and forging her own path. A role that didn't leave her bound and gagged in Gotham, but instead able to engage and interact with the wider world of the DC canon. Talia was given the chance to escape stories where her role was always subservient to the men in her life, given the chance to engage in big stories and grand conflicts on her own terms in a way that few have had, let alone former or current love interests and daughters, and then it was all scuttled so she could be returned to the role of Bruce's and Ras and our Damien's associated asset, as opposed to an individual driver of plots that matter. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you would like to help support these episodes and get early access to scripts, videos, stories and art, please hit up my Patreon. If you would like to commission 3D art, please swing by my coffee and we can chat. For now though, that's all. Thanks for stopping by.